in. I think I've got you've got record.
Okay, it said request permission from you. I don't know if we can.
Okay, so I'll make you
recorded. Okay.
I'll just say allow record as well. So now just try it now.
Says it is. Says
okay.
It's going. Yep.
All right.
Good.
Okay, so welcome to Work It Wednesday. This is a segment where we speak to some of the industry's top leaders and find out how to actually work the business. Now, today I've got a very special guest. I've got Mr. Sid Jacobson with me. How are you, Sid?
Very good. Thanks, Shane. Very good. Thanks for having me. It
is great to have you here. Now, for those who have never met Sid before, Sid is an NLP expert. Now, NLP stands for Neuro-Linguistic Programming. It is about the mind and how to actually utilize patterns and understand teaching patterns. And I'm going to let Sid actually explain it a little bit better than me, but I actually met Sid about 7 years ago, or 6 or 7 years ago now, and I've done a couple of courses with Sid, and I've found some of the stuff around NLP to be absolutely fascinating. It was like opening a door that I didn't realize existed, and when I did, I was hooked. I was just fixated on, I couldn't believe how this stuff was being used, not just to influence our buying patterns across the world, but everything in everyday life. And it is fascinating material. Sid, thank you very much for joining us here today, my friend. Mate, first of all, how would you explain NLP in about 5 or 6 minutes?
Okay, so neuro-linguistic programming is a field of study that started in the early 1970s at the University of California at Santa Cruz. There were a couple of guys there named Richard Bandler and John Grinder. John was a linguistics professor, and Richard was an information scientist. And they began by studying how people influence each other. Now, influence comes in a lot of different flavors. Well, Richard had come through the ranks, sort of working his way through college as a psychotherapist. And John had an interest in this as well, simply from the communications aspect. Richard had edited the final book of a guy named Fritz Perls, who's the guy who invented something called Gestalt therapy. It's a kind of psychotherapy that was popular in the 60s and still is today in many parts of the world. Very effective stuff. And they had a bunch of film of Fritz doing the work that he did, and they isolated moments of magic in his therapy. So Gestalt therapy is interesting in that it can be very dramatic. It's a very experiential kind of thing. You don't just sit and talk. You might act out a scene, or you might play somebody else or some other part of yourself. So they isolated those scenes and did a linguistic analysis, and they found a series of patterns in language that came up over and over again, having to do with how somebody would say something and then how Fritz would respond to what they said. Now, these linguistic patterns are not difficult. We all use them every day. But they do something in our brain. It takes a kind of thinking to hear what somebody says and then respond in a certain way. So when they were done studying him, they studied a woman named Virginia Satir, who was probably the first practicing family therapist in the world, another genius of the 60s and 70s especially. And they found even more patterns in her. And then they studied a guy named Milton Erickson, who's the father of modern hypnosis, who's probably the greatest psychiatrist that ever lived. And they found those same patterns and even more patterns in him. So they took these language patterns, just the linguistics of it alone, and began training psychotherapists, everyday therapists from their community, and turned them into superstars and knew they had something. Then they began to study salespeople. And they found exactly the same patterns used in exactly the same way. So they knew they were looking at influence, not therapy. And then they studied doctors and lawyers and teachers and politicians and evangelists and you name it. And they found these patterns over and over again. So there's a linguistics that goes with how we influence each other. The linguistics is nothing more than an external expression of what's going on internally in our mind. So then we started studying what was going on the inside. During that process, they realized that they learned how to model something, how to model anything. So if you're very good at something and I don't know how to do it, I can study you in very specific ways, not just watching what you do or listening to what you say, but getting inside your thinking and finding out how you think about what you do, and I can duplicate that part as well. If I can do that well, if I can build a model of how you do what you do, then I ought to be able to do it too. And we have modeled everything in the last 40 or 45 years that you can think of, from cooking to mechanical things, to inventiveness, to creativity, communication, all kinds of things. And NLP is continuing as that technology. How do we model people, find out what they're good at, and then package it in a way that we can teach it to other people? During that time, the expression of those modeling pieces is a lot of techniques, a lot of processes that we can use, even in our everyday lives. But those techniques and processes aren't NLP, they're just the fallout from doing that kind of research. So we study how people work, and then we study specific people who work really well at something and figure out how they do it. What's the structure, so we can teach it to other people. That's in a nutshell what NLP is. It's applicable in a number of fields. Business, of course, sales, management, communication. These are all things that I teach. It's also, of course, applicable in psychotherapy. My background is in social work and psychology. It's applicable in healthcare, and it's applicable in education. So my first books were all books about applying this in education, helping parents, helping teachers, help children how to learn and solve learning problems.
And it's fascinating because, like, you break it down into so many different, and I know that I've done a couple of courses with you, but I feel like I'm just scratching the surface of what is a massive field. But even in those short courses that we did, a couple of days on each one, I was fascinated by just how I was able to actively see people very differently. It almost taught me to look beyond what was coming out of the superficial realm and start to see certain things that they were doing, not only with their eyes, but with their hands, how they were describing certain things. One of the things that really fascinated me as far as sales go was the ability to speak in different modalities, whether it would be visual, whether it would be kinesthetic. So how does that fit into the world? So would you be able to explain just how somebody would, even through a speech pattern, can speak in a visual term?
Well, let's even take it beyond that. So let's put it in context first, and then I'll answer that question specifically. So what you're talking about is how we read people, how we understand what somebody's doing. I said it started off with studying the language patterns, but it didn't stop there. We went along and studied the body language patterns too, the other cues that people give and how they're thinking. So one of the things that we do in all of our trainings is teach people how to see people differently, the way that you were describing. So they're looking at very fine-tuned aspects of somebody's behavior, literally how their eyes look in different directions, literally how their skin tone might change, how their breathing changes, how they use their hands and their body. Because we've discovered over time that this is super useful, especially in the area of establishing relationships and understanding other people. Here's an analogy for you. You've been around people who have been married for maybe 30, 40 years, and they have a great relationship. Don't they finish each other's sentences?
Yes,
Right?
they do.
Don't they seem to know what the other one is thinking all the time? Well, we even think we know the neurological part of that at this point. There's something called mirror neurons, and we think that might be the basis of it. But essentially, when I'm talking to you, if we're establishing a close relationship, there is a certain mechanism in our brains called the mirror neuron system that's lining up in a special way. So my neurons fire the way that yours do. This is what allows people to think like someone else is thinking. We know that relationship is developed through language, through body language, through voice tone, through posture, through gestures, all the different things that we're picking up from each other. And the more we're with people, the more we're picking up these subtle signs. So one of the things that we also know is that people tend to do a couple of processes. They do 3 kinds of filters anytime we're doing anything. The first process that we do is we delete some things. So if you or I walk into a room we'll focus in on the parts of the room that are interesting to us, and we'll delete the rest consciously. It's not that we don't see it. It's not that it doesn't go into our brain. It's probably still stored there. But there's only certain parts that we're aware of. It's the same when we're talking with somebody. So we have our five senses. If I walk into a room, I might not care how it smells or what the taste of the air is. I might not care about how it feels to be in the room, but it may be very interesting to me to see certain aspects of the room or to hear what people are saying. So if I'm describing that room to you later on, I might say, oh, the room was beautiful, and I can't wait to tell you what this guy was talking about. But I'm not telling you how I felt. I'm not telling you what it smelled like or tasted like. I may only just give you how the room looked or what the person said, right? If you think about your last trip that you took, your last vacation, if I ask you, what did you like about this place that you went? You might say, oh, it was beautiful. I could see the mountains and the trees and the sky was blue. You might give me a really visual description. Or you might say, we met a whole bunch of people. We had these wonderful conversations. They told us these great stories, and the language they were speaking was so beautiful to listen to, right? Or you might say, well, you know, it was a climbing trip. So we were climbing the mountains, and it was really a lot of exertion. It got hot at times, but it was cool in the evenings. So I might be telling you more of what I saw, or more of what I heard, or more of what I felt. Now, for you and me, if you're telling me about what you felt, and I really want to understand how you're thinking, for us to communicate, we're going to talk about those feelings. If I tell you, oh, I bet it was really pretty too. You know, when I go to places, I like the way it looks, and you're saying, oh man, but it felt this way. We're passing each other in the night a little bit. This is what happens to people when they're trying to create a relationship with somebody, especially if it's one where they're trying to influence someone. And you mentioned sales. So if I'm trying to sell something to somebody and they're asking me, tell me more about this. I need to hear more. Tell me the story of how you got into this. Tell me what's most interesting about this product or this feature. You say, well, let me show you the brochures. Well, that may not be what you're interested in. You might want to talk about it some more, right? So some people are going to need to buy visually. They're going to need to see something. Some people are going to need to hear a lot of words. They might need to ask a lot of questions. And some people are going to need to try it. They need to have a real feeling sense of this product or this service. And that's an example. It's the same thing if I'm helping a child who's having a learning problem. I want to know what they're doing inside their head. Are they looking at something, talking to themselves, having a feeling about what they're trying to learn? And certain kinds of things they're learning might demand that they do use certain senses. For example, in English, when we're learning to spell, we have to have a strong visual sense. People who spell really well see the word in their mind. People who spell badly are always trying to remember how it sounds and what the letters are in. It doesn't work because in English, it's not a phonetic spelled language. There are some languages that are, so that would work. But in English, it doesn't work very well. People used to say, well, give me an example of that. And I say, okay, I want you to hear clearly the sound of a silent E. Right? It doesn't work. Or if I ask you to spell certain words, like spell right, you go, oh, R-I-G-H-T. And I go, wait, not that one. One that you do with the pen. Oh, it's W-R-I-T-E. Or it could be a rite of passage, which is R-I-T-E. They sound exactly the same, but they're spelled differently, and each one means something different. So this is an example of certain kinds of things we have to do, either visually, some other things have to be auditory. You can't learn to play music if you can only look at the notes on the page. At some point, you're going to have to hear something, right? And for most things, unless there's some sort of a feeling attached to it, we won't care about it very much. So this is a way of understanding how people operate.
And it's fascinating, as I said, but I've used this in real scenarios. So I had a car repair business, still do, went in to do a very big deal at a very high-end shop and got asked into a boardroom where the owner sat at the back of the boardroom in the dark and just was writing on his pad. And my business partner at the time was doing a lot of talking. And I realized, how am I supposed to connect with somebody who was just so disconnected? And all I did was start to mirror his actions. So I sat the same way he did. I held my body the same way. When he drank,
Right.
I drank. I started to mirror his things. And before we knew it, I was actually in rapport with him, even though we hadn't spoken verbally at all. And we were able to close that deal purely from the fact that he, when he walked out, literally said the words, "I feel like I know this guy."
Right.
And we built a trust without ever speaking more than 2 words to each other. You know, it was a very unique experience. And you know, one that really blew me back, because it was a real time scenario and a real application of being able to understand exactly what was going on around me.
And something so simple made
Yes,
such a big difference, right? So this guy could see you, and as you were moving your body the way he was, inside your brain and his brain were starting to link up in that way that I talked about. That's where this comes from. It's not all about what people say or what they do. It's unconscious, a great deal of it. And if we can tap into that power of what's happening unconsciously, we can accomplish a great deal. That's really what all relationships are based on anyway, is that unconscious processing. And everything that we do, if you're really good at something, you're not consciously aware of every little piece that you're doing. For you, it's become an automatic series of steps or behaviors that you don't have to think about. Because if we have to think about it, it becomes too cumbersome.
that's right. And this is used by advertisers globally. Like when I started to reach into this and started to be aware of what was happening, and you start to see some of the advertisements and the jingles that just go off over and over again, you know, like especially here in Australia, we've got as many as the US, and you start to see how those patterns are emerging, and you think to yourself, so NLP is, I think we've said this before, but NLP is, for one thing, learning those skills, but also it's almost a protection mechanism against those skills being used against you, right?
Absolutely. So you have a defense because you know how it works. One of the things that we do in NLP is really teach people to pay attention in new ways. That includes not paying attention to how your client might be if you're trying to help them to make a decision to buy something, hopefully a good decision. It's also how to pay attention to someone trying to sell you something, so that you're paying attention to what they're doing so that you can get good information and make your own decision about what you want. You know, it's interesting that you say that, because early on in NLP, it got the reputation as a tool for being manipulative because it's so powerful and can be so fast. But it was never meant to be that. It was meant to be something where people could really communicate and collaborate together in a way where they would make good decisions. So that if you're going to buy something and I'm selling it to you, if I haven't gathered good information about what you need, I'm worthless to you. So
Yes.
a lot of what we do is really good information gathering, what's happening unconsciously for you, but also what it is that you want, how this product or this service is going to fit into your life and how you're going to use it. And if what I have doesn't fit for what you need, if I'm smart, I'm going to help you find out what might, even if it's somebody else's product or service. I don't want to sell something to somebody that isn't something they need just because I'll make a profit on it. I want people to be happy. I want them to come back over and over again. I want them to tell their friends, and I want them to carry that feeling that they got about making a good decision far into the future. And if it isn't right for them, they won't. So the best way to make sure that is to really understand the other person.
And this is what I find fascinating about network marketing, because effectively it's not so much about the sale of a product. It is about building relationships, and a true network marketer, and I see this at the very highest levels, have the ability to maintain very strong relationships with their core people, and not just build them over time, but to, you know, keep that rapport and to manage those relationships effectively. And that's why, you very rarely hear top leaders talking about NLP, but you definitely see them using it.
Yeah.
I watch them I see all of the top leaders. They never teach it from stage, but it's definitely something that you can see that they're using it, whether that's consciously or unconsciously. Now that brings up another point. Somebody could be using those skills unconsciously. It could be just
Absolutely.
ingrained and just not know and not have the patterns around it. Is that right?
Oh, absolutely right. Because remember, most of what we know about what makes people very successful are things that we observed. These aren't things that we invented. These aren't procedures or processes for establishing before, or guiding people or influencing people that we got out of the blue or invented in a lab. They're things we observed in highly, highly skilled people, like those 3 therapists that I talked about. So taking what they do and packaging it so people can use it is what makes it useful. But the other part of that is, and this is a funny story, when they went back to Virginia Satir and Milton Erickson, who they were working with very closely, and showed them what they were doing, they didn't know.
Yeah. Wow.
Both of them said, wow, I had no idea I was doing those things. They were doing them unconsciously, automatically, really well. They even wrote blurbs on the back of the first book that said, we didn't know we were doing this, but it's right. That's what we were doing. Now that we know about it, we could do it even better, right? So that's what this is about. It's about taking those skills. And are there people out there who are natural? Absolutely. But
And that's
they're fewer and far between. And with this technology, we can all learn to be skilled at that level.
And I think what happens sometimes is I often hear people say, you are proximity is power, and you are the sum of your 5 closest friends, right? And what they're saying here is that you need to be hanging around better people. And the reason for that is because without actually saying you're learning their language patterns, you're learning the way that their posture is, that's effectively what's happening. By you being around a higher standard of person, you're learning the language patterns of the successful, right?
It's why children seem to emulate their parents. It's built in. It's the modeling process in its purest form. A little boy will walk like his dad. He'll have the same inflections or voice tones. A little girl might match the way her mom moves or the choices she would make. I'll tell you a quick funny story. We were babysitting our 3.5-year-old great niece about 10 days ago. We had her for 4 days. And watching her get dressed in the morning was hysterical. She would keep going to the closet, putting on different things, putting on stuff. She finally was standing in front of the mirror talking to my wife, Cindy, and she said, no, this just won't work. This sweater, no, take this off. Get me something sparkly that goes with the shoes. And I'm thinking, oh, this is not something this 3.5-year-old was born with.
No,
okay?
That's a model.
That from her mama, going through this every day. And she learned how to see the things that her mother was seeing, and she learned how to be just as picky. But the voice tone and the little finger and the no, all that was the stuff she was picking up. She was just being mom.
That's right? Fascinating. That's hilarious. You see it way too often, and it actually is quite hilarious when you see it in children. But it's the scary part about it is you also see it in adults. I see it in 70 and 80-year-olds who are still modeling behaviors that they did when they were children, and you go, "Wow, that's fascinating that that's still stuck there."
It really is true. I said to my training group the other day, if you grew up in a household with parents who were really great communicators, they were good at understanding people on a deep level, they were good at explaining things and asking the right questions and making sure people felt empowered, and you went to a school that was filled with people like that, and you had teachers that were filled with people like that, you probably learned to be a great communicator. Yeah. Did you grow up like that, Shane? Me neither.
Yeah, no, that's right. That is not right.
Most people didn't have that to model. So what did we model? We modeled some good stuff and some stuff that wasn't so good. And we don't know which is which. We just operate out of what we learned from the other people. It's automatic.
Now, the cool thing also with this type of science is the ability to break some of those patterns that you do pick up that may not be healthy, may not be, in the best regard. And when we did the course down in Melbourne with yourself, we were able to learn how to break some limiting beliefs. And they could be beliefs around heights or whatever it may be. Now, in network marketing, I see this a lot. There's a lot of people out there that are either afraid to speak to other people, which these skills definitely teach you how to build that communication bracket before you even start. But also the scare or the fear of not being enough, or that they're going to be rejected, the ultimate fear from everybody that they're going to be rejected. And we had a instance at a training here on the Gold Coast where a lady had a fear about not being rejected. I showed her one of the patterns that you showed me down in Melbourne. And believe it or not, it almost vanished from her immediately, but she didn't know that I had done anything to her, but she just went on a signing spree after that. And it was fascinating to watch. And I think that's purely probably the best thing. It's not about manipulation. It's about trying to help people guide themselves out of those tricky situations and get rid of some of the unwanted belief systems. Yeah.
Sure. I was talking again with my training group the other day, and we were talking about the difference between somebody who works for a company, let's say, and I've worked with lots of very successful people inside major corporations. But the difference between that, the person might be very skilled and think, well, now I'm so good at this, I'm going to go into business for myself. But going into business for yourself doesn't mean just being good at what you did. There's a whole range of other things that you have to be able to do. A lot of it is motivating yourself. A lot of it is staying focused on what's working for you. But also a lot of it is learning how to do things you probably never had to do before if you were working with somebody else. A lot of people I know are one-person shops. Well, they have to learn how to be their own clerical person, their own secretary. They learn how to answer the phone and talk to people. They have to be the salesperson. They have to be the marketer. They have to be the deliverer of whatever the service is. And these are things people have to learn. So I always start with the learning part. If you'll remember, in both of those workshops you came to, the very first thing we did at the beginning was getting people into a really good state where they could learn well. Good state of mind where they could take in information and use it really well for themselves. And everything starts with that. And if you can learn really well, then you can learn how to do all of those things. And that helps you to get past your fear. But some of those fears were learned at a very young age and learned really well. So we have specific processes and procedures to help people eliminate the fears. Fear of rejection from people, or fear of failure, or fear of making a mistake. And these are all things that are helpful for anybody who's running their own business or trying to help other people get into a business with them.
Yeah, look, it's a fascinating field. And as I said, we can't do it justice in just a short little podcast, but we're definitely going to explore this a little bit further. So what I would suggest is anybody that's out there that wants to know more about this, share this video around, like, comment, ask questions. I'm going to get these questions over to Sid, let him have a look at these. We want to bring Sid out to Australia later this year and definitely do some more stuff, especially around maybe online, do some more podcasts. Sid, there's so much to talk about. There's so many different fields. As I said, just in and what we do alone in network marketing, I'm thinking about, fears. I'm talking about building rapport. I'm talking about speaking different modalities. There's so many different segments that you could actively pick up and would improve your business by 25% each. It's like we're talking, and we add those 3 or 4 things to some of the other things that I'm probably not even aware of yet. We start to get into a massive, massive field of exceptional growth. And I think that's the key.
Absolutely. And, as I told you before, I love Australia. And I've been down there a number of times training different groups, and I love the place. I love the people. And for me, it's a joy to share this stuff. As you can tell, I just love talking about it. I can talk about it all day long. Sometimes people have to stop me at the end of the day. But it's great fun. I like sharing these tools. They're helpful for everybody in their personal lives as well as their business lives. So people who have children, I mentioned I've written 4 books around helping children. I've got a book on writing, a book on problem solving for business people, and there are a good 300 other books on NLP in the English language alone. And there's a bunch of books that are just in French, a bunch that are just in German. And there are all these books out there, and there's just a tremendous field here. And just, again, talking about it in a podcast can only give people a little taste, and we can do as many of these as you'd like. So I'm looking forward to hearing people's questions and to giving good answers and having us be able to talk about this some more. So thanks very much.
Fascinating, Sid. I love your work, my friend. I look forward to talking to you again very soon. Thank you very much for sharing your time today.
You too. Thanks a lot.